Hello, everybody. It's real estate therapy time. Your doctor is in, and I mean that for real this time because my guest today is a doctor, and she, you can tell us in a minute, Jessie, the extent to which you're practicing as a physician now because your life has taken a different direction. But I know my guest, Jessie Mahoney. I've known her for many years now, which is crazy,
19.
19 years. And Jessie is somebody who bought a home uh, along with her husband with me. And our relationship has evolved and changed, and we've gone in and out over time. And both of us have evolved more into the mindfulness and presence space over the years. And so we have a lot to talk about along those lines. But Jessie, I'd like you to introduce yourself. So take it away, Jessie.
Wonderful. So I am Jessie Mahoney, and I am a pediatrician. I always say by training, that's the terminology we use in medicine, which means that I went to medical school and did residency, and I practiced then for 18 years at Kaiser in Northern California as a pediatrician. And a few years ago, I pivoted to opening my own business, which I call Pause and Presence. And we'll talk a little bit about that, where I work with physicians in how they can work in more healthy, happy, sustainable ways. I worked in physician wellness, which is now a big thing in the medical world, for my entire career at Kaiser. And I decided at one point, as you mentioned, we sort of discover new things, that I had a whole piece of myself that I hadn't explored, and that this was a realm that I really wanted to dive into. So a few years ago, I started this business. I also became a yoga teacher and a certified coach. And now that's what I do full time, along with said husband who did buy my house with me, who's a retired attorney who helps me with this work. And I met Cynthia, actually. The reason I know it's 19 years is I was pregnant with my last child, who's about to turn 19, when we bought the house that we currently live in. And Cynthia is actually helping us get ready to sell said house and move into our next season of homehood, however that looks. And I will say that when we bought our house with you, it was not the peak of the market, but a very crazy San Francisco market. And while I think it's very funny that 19 years later we're friends and we've shared all of these other experiences, when I think back to one of the reasons that I really liked working with you is that in that craziness, you were extremely calm and extremely mindful. And it was about the home, and it wasn't about all of the noise about real estate around it. And at that time, I was pregnant. So when you're pregnant, you're really looking for a home. And I had two small children also. And so, super important to us to stay in the Bay Area because we grew up here. And so, to be able to navigate that in a more whole and healthy way was phenomenal.
Oh, that really does my heart good. I think the calm thing may be part of an act, like fake it till you make it. But I learned it was better to remain calm than to become hysterical. And but I remember that time, and you with the two small children and another on the way, and all of the urgency that goes around with nesting.
Mhm.
I don't know. Do you remember that
Oh,
feeling of?
yeah. Well, and I remember also, and I've heard you say this also many times, but encouraging us not to buy certain places, because I think when you're in a very hot market, you just want to find a place and you begin to think that you'll never find a place. And we lived in a two-bedroom at the time. So, which was a great two-bedroom rent controlled apartment. But it was going to be a little crowded with five of us. And so I
Right.
did feel that sense of urgency. I now know from my work in coaching and mindfulness, of course, that I am also, as a physician, trained to have urgency. And so I move through the world urgent. And so it's also whether I was pregnant and nesting or not, I would have approached it with urgency. And so,
Mhm.
for any of your listeners who happen to be doctors, just understanding that about yourself, that we were trained to approach everything with urgency, and we tend to bring it to our children and our spouses and our home buying. And that when you realize that, you can step back and say, is this really urgent? If I reflect now, if I said, well, I was going to buy that house and stay in it for 19 years, clearly I would want to choose the house I could stay in for 19 years. And ultimately we did. Probably also thanks to said husband who was not as urgent as I was. Perhaps he
Mhm.
just wasn't pregnant and didn't have the hormones. But either way, I think in the moment, it's very easy to get off track.
It is, and this sort of segues into something I wanted to talk about. And I went through a lot of your blog posts before we met to remind myself of the things that you have written about. And by the way, it's fantastic. So I want to be sure we'll have in the show notes where people can find you and find your work and find that. But I really got a kick out of it because it's kind of there's a real parallel with the things that I've been writing about real estate. And one thing that you had said, I think the headline for the post was actually just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean it's right for you. And I feel this a lot with clients. You know, they're getting older or they're maturing, they're stepping into their adult life. All of a sudden, they're married or they're coupled. Now it's time to think about having a family. Now it's time to buy a house, right? And it's not always the right thing to do, right? I mean, there
Yeah,
are
and I
alternatives.
see, well, I work mostly with physicians, and so we are very good at doing what we're supposed to do, and there's a time and a place for everything, and it's almost a bit checkboxy in the medical world in terms of how you do your training, and when you finish, you're supposed to buy a house, et cetera, et cetera. But I also see for many people that that's not right. And what most of us probably in society, and I'll say in medicine, but also I work with attorneys and Google executives and people like that too. We are trained to not listen to ourselves and to trust the external world and that input much more than our own input as to what the right timing would be.
Mhm.
And if we could say, well, is this the right time for me to buy a house? Is this the right time for my family? Is this the right? I often talk in my work about seasons, and is this the right season of my life to be, moving from my rent controlled apartment to a house? It might be, but just because everyone else is buying a house, it's not necessarily true for you. And I remember actually having a client who was quite a bit older, my age now, and she had not bought a house and had all of this shame and blame about having not bought a house early on. And she didn't get these things. And actually, I think I told you about her. And since then, she actually has bought a house, but she bought it, I think, when she was 60. And
Mhm.
it's worked out, and she's been able to live in all these interesting places. So it isn't always the right answer. And I think knowing yourself is really, really a key piece of it. And I know for those of us in medicine, we were actually trained not to listen to ourselves in that way. We did not have to go to the bathroom. We weren't tired. We weren't hungry. We didn't have other needs. And so we were also taught, in a room with patients, you weren't supposed to feel too much because if you did, you would be distracted.
Right.
It's changing in medicine now. But when we get to the end, we're trained to not connect with that. And so when you're doing something as big as buying a house, you really have to untrain yourself and relearn how to do that. I
Yeah.
always go to mindfulness/yoga for that to sort of get to know yourself or hand to heart, but it takes a lot of practice.
Well, that's that there's a I don't know if it's for surgeons, there's that mantra of no doubt, first no doubt, like you're supposed to be completely confident about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um,
But no
and so
human has no doubt, by the way.
right. And so
I think
I can see how that developed over time, that this was the code,
mhm,
this was the protocol for physicians was to don't feel, don't become attached because you're here to do a job and you're supposed to be objective and clear headed, right?
mhm.
And but it's funny how with real estate, some people will get on this path and it's just I try to watch it when I see people getting on this path of must buy now, and it has to be this certain thing. And this certain thing, let's say it's a um, Russian Hill condo with a view. Somehow they got it in their head that it had to be a Russian Hill condo with a view. But in fact, they're someone who loves to go surfing every morning. And and a better choice for them might be something in the outer park side or the Sunset, where they can just roll out to Ocean Beach and really enjoy the morning by the ocean instead of driving across town. But once you get it in your head, it's hard to it's hard to get off that train. Um, how do you help the people that you work with tune in and get present? I mean, you talked about yoga for
Yeah.
yourself. How do
Well, I think
you
the
come back
first
to
thing is
yourself?
why I call what I do pause and presence is to pause. Because if you don't pause, you're reacting, meaning you're in autopilot, making decisions not from thinking about them. And so rather than reacting, you can respond if you pause. And if you pause and slow down, you can't listen if you don't slow down. Most of us, by the way, don't slow down. We just keep going and going and going. And I would say in the real estate world, that's even more true. And in San Francisco market, even more true in that if you slow down, the house is already sold. But
Right.
I think it's also such a big life decision that we have to slow down. And so to pause, and I often say pause and breathe because we all have to breathe. But if you immediately just say pause and breathe and begin to notice, and you can notice how you feel. One of the other practices that I love is just hand to heart. And bringing that hand to heart, it actually scientifically releases good, feel good hormones that you can feel, and that feels amazing. And it's really hard to make decisions totally out of alignment and not check in with yourself when you do that. And so these hand to heart practices, and I usually do one hand to heart and the other hand on top. So you're really connected to yourself and you're really listening. So if you pause and you do that, you're releasing these neurochemicals that actually help you connect to yourself. So oxytocin is a connection hormone. And so all of these things are, they might seem woo, but they actually get you into that space. And when you're not um, in medicine, we call it sympathomimetic storm, but it would be fight or flight, like running away from the tiger, which most of us live in most of the time.
Right.
When in that nervous system state, you can't make a good decision. You're not in touch with yourself. And so we're sort of talking about most doctors are in that all the time, but I would say most people probably in the Bay Area are in that all the time. And so these practices can actually get you out of that. They can retrain your parasympathetic nervous system. Mindfulness does that. Yoga does that. And this hand to heart is what I would call a self compassion practice. But the reason it works so well is it's actually like physical, and you're touching, and it makes you stop and pause.
Well, it's so, I mean, when I do that,
Yeah.
that's there's some comfort there.
Mhm.
It reminds me, okay, and I'm going to call myself Cindy. It's like little me inside. It's like, okay, Cindy, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
This is okay. You can do this. And yet it's so hard to take that to remember to take that breath. Just one conscious inhalation and exhalation, or putting your hand on your heart, makes all the difference in my experience. But
And I
we're
think
on such a fast pace; it's hard to do that.
And many people struggle to even hit the pause button, right? Because you have to remember to do it. They're happy to do it once they remember. And I think that's actually where some of the regular mindfulness practices or regular yoga or regular breathing practices, then you have that nanosecond pause in there that you're like, oh, right, I want to actually pause and think about it. I also find when you're having trouble making a decision, for me, that hand to heart is super helpful. So if I put my hand to heart, and I actually have to close my eyes because the world is busy and noisy, and then I can just know like, oh, actually, I do want to do that, or oh, I don't want to do that. And that can be really, really helpful. The other question that I love in making a decision is asking what would love do? And it strikes me as a perfect real estate question. And as you know, actually, I'm thinking about a real estate decision in my mind as we speak here. Um, and I was thinking, I should be doing my hand to heart and asking that question, and I bet I'll get the answer. But why I love that what would love do is like, what would love do for you? What would love do for perhaps your spouse, your children, your family? Um, and you can grow it out from there. So your business or your patients or your clients, and then I always get out to eventually the world at large, but it might be society or it might be whatever else you're involved in. But to me, that question never steers you wrong. And it gets you out of, do I like it? Do I not? Is it a good, where are the pros and cons? It really gets you into alignment with who you are.
And that piece, that little piece of self-awareness and self-compassion.
Mhm.
I mean, what would love do? Hand on heart, a pause, a deep breath. If we do regular mindfulness practices, then pretty soon, 1 out of 3 times, if there's some tension, we're going to say, wait a minute, I can pause for a moment and be curious about what I'm feeling. But the hand on heart thing, what I associate with that is, you hear all the time the saying about home is where the heart is.
Yes. Yes.
And I, I, my own philosophy, there's probably a bunch of real estate agents out there who are going to maybe disagree with me, but I believe home really starts in our own hearts. Like within me, this is where my home is at its most fundamental. And then, like a real estate choice, for example, um, that's going to be an extension of who I am. And so, why not start inside? Why not start saying, what would love do?
Yeah.
How does this feel?
Well, and we were actually talking about this idea of feeling the house. And my husband teases me because I can look at all the pictures in the world, but I have to feel it and be in it and probably practice hand heart in it to know how I feel about the house. It might look great on this outside, and I would walk in and say, nope, this doesn't feel right. And I think once you've learned those practices, it's a super valuable way to think about it. And my thought would be that many people would say that's not really what buying real estate is about. And I think I've heard don't get too attached because you won't, it might not work out. And yet I also think in case it does work out, you want to make sure that it's the right place for you because it does sometimes.
I had a phone call. I don't know, last year, a woman called me because she saw my blog, realestatetherapy.org. She was doing a Google search. I had never met her. She lived down in SoCal. And I think she was actually Googing. She was Googing. She was Googling therapy and real estate. And she got real estate therapy. And she read my blog and she called me and wanted to know if I could help her, counsel her, because she had made a terrible mistake. She had bought a property, she'd gotten on the path, it had been a big hurry. She'd made an offer, she'd closed the property, and then realized that she hated it. She hated it. And we had a long talk about that. And I tried, to help her with some comfort around it. There probably was, there weren't any legal remedies that were going to help because she had signed up for this and done it all
Mhm.
willingly. Uh, but I think a lot of times people are, looking online, they're looking at photos and they're thinking, wow, this has everything I want. So
Mhm.
this must be the place. And then they go after it. But it's almost like if you're on a dating site. I've never been on a dating site, but I would imagine you can have somebody who checks all the boxes. And when then you meet them, it is not happening at
Yeah.
all, right? The photos could be great, but it just doesn't feel good.
Yeah. Well, and I think we often don't take that into account when we're thinking about real estate. It's how many bedrooms does it have? I realize it still needs to have the right number of bedrooms for the right number of people, but that's probably less important than how the space feels to you.
Absolutely. I it's and sometimes it can even be tell me if you've experienced this. It can look really quite nice. It can be a fantastic house in your price range, and
Yeah.
something just doesn't feel good. Something's off.
I think that happens a lot, and I think many of us choose to ignore those signals. Or, and I will say, and I'm working with physicians who are maybe working in a job and it doesn't feel right, and they can't really explain why, but we tend to not trust ourselves in that. We tend to think, well, on all for all these reasons, it fits on paper. And I often say, it's really hard to leave something that you think looks good on paper, even if even it might have been a good fit for you before, but it's not now, for example. But I think the same thing is true in real estate. It's like, this is a great deal. You should want it. But maybe you don't, and maybe it's not a good fit. And I think that's where it's just very different than, well, it's probably not different. Even if buying a pair of pants, they have to feel right, feel like you.
Right. But how often, I mean, I don't know about you, Jesse, but I've, how often have I bought something? I try not to do it anymore, but because it's on sale
Yep.
or it was a mood I was in
Yeah.
and I maybe don't really love it. I
Yeah.
don't love it. And certainly with an item that costs 19, let's say it's $15 blouse at Ross Dress for Less. Okay, maybe I don't have to love it. I can take a little gamble on that,
Mhm. But not on a house.
but not on a $1,999,000
Yeah.
house,
The other thought that's coming to mind here, my husband and I have been married for a very long time, and m- understanding that each of different person might have a different reaction. So sometimes my husband thinks it's great, and I'm like, it just won't work for me. And or I think it's great and he's like, nope, it's not going to work for me. And I think that interplay of realizing that you might not even be able to say why, you just know that it's not right, and so it does have to be something that's right for both of you. And that often we think we have to make them understand why it's not right. My husband now knows me well enough. I'm like, light's not right. It's not facing the right direction, whatever. He doesn't care. He's just like, if she doesn't like it, we can't have it. But I know that my tendency is like, but why? Like, if I like it, I need, explain it to me so I can talk you out of it.
right?
And yet, now that I have done all my work in coaching and mindfulness, I don't talk people out of things. But I think many of us, when we're in this urgency or in this, strong desire to find a home, it really is a key relationship point, and you want to make sure that you are on the same page.
Definitely. And in my role as representative for a lot of couples, um, I try to bring to it, a lot of positive regard and compassion for each partner in who they are and what they need and want. And occasionally I find myself needing to, it's not defend isn't the right word, but being sure that one partner isn't kind of running over the other one out with fully good intentions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But there's a couple I'm working with right now where one of them is very doesn't say much, doesn't have much to say, and the other one
Has a
has a
lot.
lot to say, knows exactly what they want. And the other one is the process is just very different for them. So I need to help both
Mhm.
of them. I need to help the one partner slow down, and I need to help the other partner find the time that they need, and then help and help keep that balance there so they feel safe because it's scary, as you know.
It strikes me as actually an opportunity to grow a relationship. I think many people feel like, well, I have my marriage now, I get my house. But the process of buying a house for many people, and I, is a bit traumatic and overwhelming. And I know that when I headed into it, actually, this is the only house I've ever bought, but when I headed into it, I had no idea what was involved. And I thought I just didn't know about the money and the legal contracts and all that stuff, but there's so much more involved. And I think it would, this is in retrospect many years later, but what a cool way to think about it as an opportunity to grow your relationship and your communication. And I imagine that a lot of marital rifts occur, or cracks that were there grow wider in this process because there's so much stress involved. And so I love your therapy word. I was thinking you're a little bit of a couples counselor too, probably.
A little bit, and I would never presume that I know that much, but there is a kind of witnessing,
Mhm.
and there's the word fiduciary, um,
Yeah.
which I take very seriously, because I they are people I'm working with are in my care, and I want them to have the best result possible. I mean, I have worked with couples where I can see those fractures,
Yeah.
and if someone were to pull me aside and say, "Hey, what do you think?" I
Mm,
might be able to give you, the odds of whether that relationship's going to make it or not. Sometimes, you can see it; it's that clear. Um,
yeah.
I don't
All
like
these
it when
things
that
you would never
happens.
imagine being part of buying a house
Yeah,
or a home. A home.
I know. I talked to somebody recently who's, the long and short of the conversation was something like, "How hard can it be to do what you do?"
Mm,
And I thought, okay, whatever. Uh,
yeah. Hard.
you go, you be you. I don't know if you said it this way, but it
Close. Yeah.
really lines up with my thinking that hypervigilance is the destroyer of joy. And I think hypervigilant, I know that from my own life with
Mhm.
my OCD anxious tendencies. But I also think hypervigilance can get in the way of heartful decision making.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Well, and I think we think along the way, certainly in medicine, we're trained that hypervigilance is important. It's good. You don't want to miss something. You need to be, all in there and managing and controlling all kinds of things that are outside of your control. But when you're focused on that, you actually can't know what you want. I'm thinking it keeps you out of presence. And you have to be present to feel joy. And so if you're thinking about it that way, it takes out the joy. I know that the I think it applies differently in real estate, but hypervigilance is distracting. It's also fear based and usually comes from scarcity mindset or fear of missing out or catastrophizing or something, which are all thought patterns that are not helpful for most of us.
those all run in my family, every one of those. We have a predisposition toward that, you know.
Well, and I love to share. All you have to do is notice it, because then if you say, "Oh, I'm catastrophizing about," and I will say, when I was buying a house, I was catastrophizing. We would never get a house, never. And I don't know what I would have to move to Nebraska, even though I grew up here. And of course, that's catastrophizing. But as soon as you call yourself on it, it loses its power.
Right. And if we go with the idea that home is starts right inside us, home is here.
Mm,
If you needed to move to Nebraska, you could probably figure out how to do it
yeah.
and enjoy it,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I might love Nebraska. I've actually never been to Nebraska, so it might be amazing for all I know.
Well,
Um,
I like in the city of San Francisco, I feel like I've never met a neighborhood I didn't like.
mhm.
Um, so maybe I could extend that outward throughout the US.
I bet
Um,
it's actually there's many, many beautiful places. I do think even if you think about that thinking, it's a little bit of scarcity mindset, like this is the only place to be. Um, Although if your family is somewhere, I think that makes it feel even more scarce, honestly. If your family's in a place where it's hard to buy a house or hard to live, and you want to be close to family, that's a challenge.
yeah, it's definitely, and there's all these factors that come into play,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
and when you are in the midst of trying to find that place, and you're beginning to it is so distracting. All of the details that you must pay attention to can begin to um, distract you from what's really important, to maybe, and can begin to um, up the fear that you're feeling.
Mhm.
You know, when you're having to, especially in real estate or something, I would imagine this is like, you're having to sign a lot of documents. You're having to say, oh, you told me about this seismic hazard and I'm okay with it. You told me that there's a potential for mold and that's all right. And there's a new development through the block. Okay, that's fine. The neighbor upstairs plays the trumpet in the middle of the night. Okay, I'm okay with that. And the sum of that could be beginning to feel kind of crushed with worry. Um,
Well, I struggle with that a lot. I was like, we should talk about this because I do think so. If you're someone that's trained to catastrophize and focus on the negative, and then they give you, because they have to in real estate, all the negatives, that plays into all of your sort of negative, unhelpful training. And I do find it hard to then be excited about any house because they have to put all those things. And I am trained to worry about all the worst case scenarios, even if it's very unlikely. Your job in medicine is to be aware of those. And so I have to say, I have to be kind to myself and just remember that, like, this is not my strong suit, looking at disclosures. They always make me upset.
right.
But I'm wondering, do you have a thought? I mean, I can probably meditate before I look at them. That might help. But do you have a thought of how you help people navigate that?
Well, when it comes to disclosures, there's so much. There's so much, and the original intention is to not have a buyer beware situation and to inform people fully about what's going
Mhm.
on.
Mhm.
But if you like, I was looking at a disclosure package today that was 450 pages long, and it was not for a condominium, it was for a single family home. Now, how does that happen? I'm not Well, it happens. And so I try to walk people through them, at
Mhm.
least, and help them focus on what's important. What are the documents here that aren't
Mm.
just
Mhm.
boilerplate, you're signing off on it whether it scares you or not, and what is actually germane to this property. um, and I'll say, Jesse, I often will dive into a disclosure package myself. I always look and
Yeah.
I hit certain key points, like, what's the seismic situation? Um, are we in a liquefaction zone? Do we have a brick foundation? I go down my list.
Yeah. Well,
And
and I think that's very helpful and not something that those of us who don't read disclosures all day.
right.
But I'm having a thought here that for me, it's probably very much a hand heart moment. Like if I could just be like, oh, this is just the thing. It always is going to trigger you because, as a doctor, you're trained to think about, well, these are all wrong. They need to be fixed. It's very hard to step out of that mindset and know when it's helpful and when it's not. And so it just strikes me as that moment. There's a lot of self compassion that comes into this real estate buying.
Well, I think it's actually it's something I need for myself as an agent,
Yeah.
like the 450-page disclosure package I'm talking about. Um, I've looked at quite a few disclosure packages for this one client, and it seems like on every one there's something else, there's something new, there's some surprise, and I keep thinking, can I just see a property where there's no surprise, no thing that's going to alarm me? And sure enough, in this 450-page document, there was a new thing that I've not encountered before.
Hmm.
And I felt so bad for me because I was going to have to explain it. I was going to have to spend
Hmm.
a lot of time explaining that I can't explain it and that they're going to have to investigate it, that I can't solve it for them. And that's hard. You know, I can't just answer this for you. Um, if it's a brick foundation, I'm probably going to say, don't bother, walk away. But if it's something more nuanced, um, I have to have some self compassion as I begin to try and impart this tricky news to the client. Um,
Well, and what I love about that is that I think most people involved in that process, we're not thinking about how the real estate agent is feeling. I also think that, in medicine, nobody's thinking about how the doctor is feeling. And yet everyone all around needs the self-compassion, just like everyone around needs the love, right? And so um, I think our world, no matter what the transaction is, needs more of that.
yeah, and that's funny that yes, the physician needs love. The the painter who comes to paint the house
Needs love.
could use your love. This the guy who is working under the table without a license to do the new landscaping.
Mhm.
Um, he probably deserves some love and respect. And a lot of times that goes, that's just part of life. It goes missing way too often,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, and just as a society, we need more of that. So if we can infuse it in real estate and medicine, at least for the two of us, that would be fantastic.
Let's talk about the idea of luxury,
Yes.
because luxury is luxury is one of those key words that I'm supposed to plaster all over all marketing materials.
Yeah.
Luxury, luxury, luxury. And the definition of luxury in real estate for a long time, the most pedestrian definition of luxury is anything that's $1 million or more. Well, in San Francisco,
Everything.
it's all luxury pretty much, right? Um, tell me tell me what luxury means to you.
So I know this came from a post I wrote about. I actually choose words for the year, and one of my words was luxurious. But what luxurious to me means is that it feels really good. And so, my luxurious, and I think your luxurious, is nature and like comfy sheets and beautiful fresh air and healthy organic food. And so, we each get to define our luxury. So, I guess it's fine to use that word because it's going to feel luxurious to somebody.
Mhm.
And imagine if we all just move through life. I think so many of us are addicted to struggling and suffering. And so I see luxury, well, not so much luxury, but feeling luxurious as an amazing thing that we should all aspire to. But it doesn't have to mean fancy, it doesn't have to mean expensive. It really is almost like the most luxurious, I don't know, cozy sweater, which doesn't even have to be cashmere. It just has to feel good. Could be a sweatshirt, could feel luxurious. So to me, it's treating yourself really well and doing things that feel luxurious to you. A hot bath could feel luxurious. It doesn't have to be, you do have to have a bathtub, but beyond that, it doesn't have to be fancy. And so I like to think of the things that feel luxurious to you and create a life that has more of those. Might be more walks on the beach, for example, or you mentioned a surfer, more surfs. That could be a luxurious life. And I think we all get to choose what that is with intention. And so, while it's a funny real estate word, it actually could apply in that way. If it just luxury feels good to you, then anything could be have luxury.
Yes, and I love that. I love that because luxury to me, it feels good. And there's something about pleasure
Yeah,
that goes along with luxury. And pleasure is so undervalued. And if it's not undervalued, it's at least twisted around to mean you have to work hard. You better work your butt off, and then you deserve some pleasure,
right.
right? And so we end up in this kind of consumer mindset of, okay, I've earned it. Now I'm going to spend what I've earned on this pleasure or this reward. And so maybe that's a yacht, right? For some. Um, I was recently at a 5 or 6 star resort, and I really just felt uncomfortable, and I felt like I was being um, poked and prodded at every turn to spend a little money on something.
Mhm.
And then there was the comparing myself with other guests, like my attire wasn't right, but
Mhm.
I didn't want to be dressed that way. I didn't want to be wearing heels and full makeup, and I wanted
Mhm.
to be in my schlumpy linen pants, you know? They
Yeah.
felt good. That felt like luxury to me. Um,
And I love your point about pleasure because I think most of us don't orient to pleasure and we think it's somehow just this luxurious thing. And yet we should be reconnecting to pleasure. And that for many people who are trying to heal, right, we're focused on pain and removing pain, but you can redirect your attention to pleasure and your life's already better without changing anything. And so, um, I just love this idea of thinking even about home as a space. Like, really, what you want in that home is to feel like you could have pleasure there. So, whether we call that luxury or pleasure doesn't matter, but all of us could use a little more reorientation to that, not in a guilt or indulgent way, but just as something that's important in life. Our culture is pretty much addicted to hard and addicted to pain and comparative suffering. And so, could we all attend to pleasure, but again, not expensive pleasure, just pleasure? So the smallest, tiniest house can bring a lot of pleasure.
right. And there's the Buddhist principle of, I forget what they're called, the eight, there's the eight somethings, but you can you could lean in toward pleasure or pain. So like pain bad, pleasure good. The Buddhist idea would be that neither one, you don't really want to be seeking either one necessarily, that what you want is to be comfortable or present in your
Mhm.
own skin in the moment. And there is something kind of eternal and beautiful that opens up for us when we can
Mhm.
be present in the moment. Time slows down, and time is one of the most precious things that we have, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. And presence is appreciating the time.
yeah, definitely.
Time can actually bring a lot of pleasure. It almost goes both ways.
Is yeah. I mean, I think about my little rat race life running around, and when somebody will cancel something or be late, it's great. I can
Mhm.
always fill that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Often, unfortunately, with doing some other busy work, but every now and then I get caught where, golly, I have to just sit on this bench and look at the sky for a
And I
minute.
would actually nudge you to do that more.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
I think we go to what can I get done? I have this little window and we get back into that urgency. And yet, what I find when from working with just so many sort of high achievers who are so busy and have all these lives, that what we really need is the pause. And that's where your nervous system can heal and recover. And we don't believe in our society that anyone needs to recover, but we all need to recover. That's human. And
Yeah,
so taking those little micro pauses, they don't even have to be much, your 5 minute window or could you take a few breaths before you go to do your to-do list?
yeah. To walk outside, feel
Mhm.
the air on your face,
Mhm.
or have a glass of water. Glass of water is always nice.
Well, I know we both teach mindfulness and are into yoga and into all of this, but so much of it for me is figuring out how to put it into your life. So so taking a moment to be mindful and get some fresh air, or oh, I'm thirsty. I will say in medicine, we were taught we weren't thirsty and we never need fresh air, but we actually do need both because we're humans.
Right.
And so to reorient that, like, actually, I can take a minute or two and go do those things, and it can be a really powerful way. If you don't have 45 minutes to do your meditation, totally fine. Just take a couple deep breaths and enjoy the breeze on your face.
Yes. I mean, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, great. 3 breaths, that's, to me, that's luxurious. That's
Yeah.
pleasurable. Just feeling the air coming into our body, feeling
Mhm.
it on in all the corners of our lungs and at the back of our ribs, and coming through your nose. I mean, how delicious is that?
Yeah. And I'm thinking if you're trying to make decisions, we actually need more of that, right? We need to feel replete to make a good decision. We need to feel present to make a good decision. And yet we just push right through most of the time.
Right. And then you see where you are. There was one other thing that you said that I wanted to talk about. And this kind of circles back to that, the nesting urge or the
Mhm.
wish um, to buy real estate, for example, um, thinking that perhaps that if I can just buy a house or buy the next house or move to Pacific Heights or whatever it is, that things are going to be better there, that the grass is going to be greener. And you had written that the grass is greener where you water it. I wondered if you could say something about that and how it relates to maybe to home, finding
Yeah.
oneself at home.
Well, first of all, if you don't water the grass, it dies. And so what that is really attending to um, enjoying where you are, but it's actually tending to where you are and taking care of where you are and taking care of your relationships or taking care of your environment and taking care of yourself in it. Because we so often say, if I move here, it'll be better. Or in my case, people get a new job, it will be better. Or um, if I quit my job, it'll be better. My life will be better. But if you don't do that work on yourself, watering the grass, and you don't do that work on your relationship, or you don't do that, and I'm going to say work on your home, but it's not necessarily painting it even. It's the work of noticing the things that are good. Many of us are trained to notice all the things that are bad, which is not watering the grass where you are. So it's investing in yourself and your life in where you are. And for most people, when you've done that work, you might not need to move at all. Or you might say, yeah, where I am is fine. But what it does is get you moving forward towards something you want. But I really want this, or I really want to live in the country, or I really want to live at the beach. That's different than moving because your place is not as good and you want to move somewhere better. And so
Right,
when we can water the grass where we are, it usually results in green grass where you are. So things are okay. And you want something different, which is a very different space of choosing real estate or a house or a home
right,
than it's better this fancier neighborhood, or when I have 3 bedrooms will be happier, for example.
right. Just the urge to acquire,
Yeah.
to make an acquisition because that's going to solve anything. I mean,
Mhm.
before I uh, I'm really good friends with my ex-husband, but when there was a big part of the marriage that there were some pretty unhappy times within me, at least. And, boy, I loved buying dishes. I would get lots of dishes and linens, and I spent so much of my focus was on this sort of acquiring the accoutrement of a happy house,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I
And
also hear people talking about a clean house. And so they spend, parents, and I'm a pediatrician, they spend all this time keeping things clean and organized. And yet, that is not the sign of a happy, healthy home. Generally, if you have kids, mess is a sign of a happy home. But somehow that's what we're supposed to do. And things will be better. They'll feel better when it's clean. I
right,
mean, we do feel better when it's clean. But if you've missed out on your children and all you do is clean and work, then you don't feel better. And it's not really a home, it's just a clean house.
yeah, it's a balance, right?
Yeah,
Always like
exactly.
let's not dip into hoarding,
Mhm, mm.
and
Yes,
but
absolutely.
maybe
That is
having
where I would also ask the question, it's greener where you water it, but also what would love do? Because say you were in a toxic job or a house that, really didn't work for you or was filled with mold, or I don't know, you would have to give the house analogy. But there are times where love would change, and love would not hoard, and love would not be unhygienic in the cleaning, but it wouldn't also need to have it spotless.
right, 'cause there is something a little wrong when it's all too perfect. As far as I'm concerned, when I see a house and people are I mean, I don't want to cast judgment on anyone, but you have to wonder um, if a house is absolutely pristine.
Mhm.
What's going
What's
on?
going on?
There's probably not any children anywhere nearby. I'll say that.
I do think that's a bit the difference, and it's one of the things I love that you talk about is a home versus a house. So you have a clean house versus a home. A clean home is not totally clean. It's
Right.
lived in.
Right. Yeah. It's not, hopefully there's nothing growing in the corner,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Exactly.
Unless you're going to adopt it as a pet. It's
Yeah.
getting bigger and it's fine.
Yeah. Love it.
Um,
Love it.
so we could keep on talking, but I think we've probably done enough for today.
Yeah.
I always like to ask if somebody has a good real estate story.
Well, it's good. I had one and now I can't remember it, so I'm gonna just come up with one on the fly. But I think what I was thinking of as a good real estate story is to really think that it probably will turn out better than you expect. And I'm back to our conversation at the beginning of this being our 12th house, and I was certain it was not going to turn out better than I expect. And this is something that I talk about a lot in my work. Is as doctors, we always think it's going to turn out worse than we think, and we go worst case scenario. And yet, I think very often in a real estate journey, when you don't get a house, it's for the best. And could we just say it very well might turn out better than you expect? And so my 19-year house was my 12th house, I think. At least it wasn't the 13th, but it was the 12th. And or 12th try, and that it did turn out better than you expected. And even, we went through a lot together in that time, and our relationship turned out better than we would expect. And probably we wouldn't have had such a relationship if we didn't have to go through all those houses.
That's
Um,
right.
and so I think that might be my real estate story. Oh, the other funny piece actually ties into that, and it's something my husband said yesterday, which is the beautiful thing about this house, which I would never have thought that I would have bought. We bought our house, it was all fixed up. And I will say that that has been genius and a total gift for us because we're not fixer uppers and we just didn't. I mean, I don't know, we might have ended up divorced if we had to fix all these things like that. So it led to this was not something I was looking for, but what a gift that we bought a house. Now it needs some, as you said, some deferred maintenance, but really it served us super well with 3 children. And that was also a very unexpected gift and not something I was looking for, but
Mhm.
oftentimes you get exactly what you need.
That's very wise. Getting exactly what you need. It's lucky that those other houses didn't work out. And there we cannot underestimate the value of something that's done. A lot of times people think they need to buy something that needs some work
Yeah.
or a
Well,
fixer
because it's a
because then
better
they're making
deal.
the most of their investment.
Yeah.
But in fact, if you consider that doing any work to realize that investment is going to take a whole bunch of time.
Invest in marital harmony, doing no work, no
Exactly.
sawdust, no contractors. I'm actually thinking I didn't realize I was making that investment, and it was very wise as 2 working parents with 3 small children.
Yeah. You were
And
investing in your time.
yeah,
You were
yeah.
investing in, I mean, you could make better money as an
There's a
attorney and a
funnier part to
doctor.
this story now that I'm thinking about it. There are things in my kitchen that I don't love, but
Mhm.
I will tell you that for the first 5 years, every time I opened up the cupboard, that it really should have some of those spinny things in the cupboard because you have to, like, really crawl to get in the back, and I would say, "Yes, but I didn't have to do the kitchen, so it's fine." Every time, because I knew that I was not a kitchen remodeler. I was like, "Well, I would have done it differently, but thank God I didn't have to do it."
I love it. So, well, I think we can end on that little example of the spinny thing.
I
The
don't know what
spinny
they're
thing.
called.
I guess, well, it's a carousel maybe.
Carousel, yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah,
the spinny thing in the corner.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but thank you so much, Jessie. Can you we'll put it in the show notes, but
Yeah.
can you tell people where they can find you?
They can find me. The easiest way to find me is actually through my name. So my website is jessiemahoney.com, and it's Jessie with an IE. If you also type in pauseandpresence.com, you also get me. And I would love to connect with any and all of you. It is fun work to do this coaching and mindfulness work. It applies to everything. And if you're looking for a realtor, you should connect with Cynthia because she's fabulous.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I'm going to go after this, go outside and walk around the block just as uh, following your suggestion.
Me too,
Um,
actually. There you go.
yeah. Doesn't that sound good? All
Yes.
right. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.